Hi, I'm Jason Gant. I'm the pastor of Kids and Families here at Resurrection.
And I'm Kori Lauritsen.
And we are beginning the second week of a 4-week session where we're hoping to become better parents. And we want to equip you and encourage you and inspire you to do just that. And I want to give us a moment of spiritual reflection to context the content we're about to learn today, because it's about the renewing of our minds. And in Ephesians 4, there's this great scripture where Paul is writing to the church of Ephesia, and he says there's going to be a time when we are no longer children, no longer infants, some translations say, that where we mature up. He says this: instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. And that's our hope. So as we learned back in session 1, and Kori will kind of debrief that in a moment, it's really important to recognize we are not called to be perfect. We are called to be true, and true love, the love of Christ. So I'm going to invite us to pause, open with a moment of prayer before we get into the content. Let's pray. Holy God, we invite your spirit of love to flow through us. Open and renew our minds that we might hear these ideas, ways in which we can pragmatically be better in our parenting. We love our children, our grandchildren, the kids that we have opportunity to influence over, God, and we ask that you would be present in their lives through us, and that we would be those instruments of love, love that echoes the love that you offer all the world in Jesus Christ. Amen. Let's go.
Welcome back to Conscious Not Crazy. I'm Kori, and I'm grateful to be here again with your community. If you tuned in last week, thank you. Thank you for joining again. If this is your first time, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we talked about and a little bit about me, just so you have some context as to why I'm here talking about Conscious Not Crazy. So my journey began when I had kids. There's no owner's manual. And I have a 14-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old son. And yes, it's one of the most challenging but fulfilling and rewarding jobs, that of being a parent. And I had a very strong-willed 4-year-old that gave me a run for my money. And I'm like, I need some tools. I'm missing some skills. And so that's kind of how Conscious Not Crazy came to be. I was talking to a mom, venting about my frustrations, and she told me about a school. And that school had a unique approach to behavior management, and it had a high focus on the social emotional learning of a child. And so, long story short, my kids ended up going to the school for 9 years. They went there from preschool through 5th grade, and I also became a teacher at that school. My background is in education, so in addition to being a parent, I've been an educator. I've worked with kids from age 2 all the way through 16. And I've worked in both a non-traditional teaching environment that was experience-based learning to a public school teaching environment. So I've worked in 2 types of environments as well. In addition to that, I'm a consultant for schools, so I do professional development for teachers to help them with personal growth and development and mindset, or I go into the classroom to observe their struggles with a particular child or situation or just a class in general. And I will offer tips or tools in real time and model things for them in the classroom. And I'm a speaker, so that's why I'm here talking to you today. And I just have a passion for sharing my own struggles. I have humility in that. I am not perfect at it. I strive to be better than yesterday. And that's kind of what we talked about last week. What I focused on last week is there is no perfect parent. How do we become a better parent? That should be the goal. So we don't give up better for perfect. And how we become a better parent is by becoming the best version of ourselves. And to support parents, I also launched a podcast. So I have a podcast. It's called Conscious Not Crazy. Imagine that. So Conscious Not Crazy by Kori. It's on all the platforms, where I also try to share tips and information, because I don't want parents to feel like I felt when I felt like I was failing and I was struggling and in a constant power struggle with my child. My daughter was too young at the time, so my 4-year-old was the one that was challenging me at that particular time. So it is my passion and it's my goal to be a support to parents and educators. So that's a little about me. Now, what are we going to talk about in this session? Well, there's 8 foundational principles that Conscious Not Crazy is founded on. And we're going to talk about the first 3 today in this session. So the 8 principles are understanding the brain states, because our brain has a huge role in what I talk about. And what's so awesome about everything I talk about is if you work on these things and you use these tools, the things that I'm sharing with you, it will not only help you as a parent, but it will actually help you in every relationship in your life. It'll help you in your relationship with your spouse, with other family members, or even coworkers or bosses. They are just basic human behavior skills. That's all I'm talking about. This is not a parenting philosophy. It is tools that you can use in every aspect of your life. It's just human behavior. And I pulled the information that how Conscious Not Crazy came to be started as a parenting journey, but really I read a lot of self-help and business books. I've had the opportunity to work hands-on with kids in a non-traditional behavior management model that was focused on understanding the why behind behavior and the brain state. Composure and mindset is another foundational principle. Productive attention, because what we focus on, we get more of. So we want our attention to be productive. Those are the three we're going to focus on here today. Next, in the next session, we're going to focus on encouragement and connection, positive choices and empathy. And then in the last one, if you're able to tune in, which I hope you are, I hope you're finding this valuable and you tune into all of them, a positive intent and logical consequences. So that is our plan. So let's get started. Understanding the brain states. Why is that important? Because we need to understand the why behind behavior. There are three parts of our brain. There's the cognitive processing center. Those are your prefrontal lobes. This is where we problem solve, where we're rational human beings. Then we have our emotional state. We're maybe not as rational. Maybe that's a child crying or whining or upset. That's what that might look like, or a teenager rolling their eyes. And then we have fight or flight. And I bet you can imagine what that looks like. As a parent, that might look like screaming and yelling. As a child, that might look like an all-out tantrum or hitting or throwing something. That is the fight or flight part. And my goal is to teach you about the parts of the brain and how to get the child from the emotional state back to the cognitive processing state of the brain so they can learn and grow and develop healthy coping skills, because it is possible. And how we prevent them from going the emotional state to that fight or flight. We want to stop that before it happens. So let's get into that. Why do our children lose it when we correct their behavior? Well, there's a reason for that, because we are often focused on making the behavior stop, instead of seeing the child's misbehavior as an opportunity to teach them missing skills. By nature, kids aren't trying to push our buttons. They're not being mean. Kids that hit, punch, break things, they often are just missing a skill. If my teenager calls me a name, they're just missing a skill. They don't have the appropriate coping skill for that situation. I'm an adult, and some days I show up and I'm missing skills. So it's interesting to me that we sometimes expect more from our children than we expect from ourselves. So let's talk about that. If we focused on connection, what if we focused on connecting with our child instead of correcting our child? What would that look like? How do we connect with our child, especially in moments of distress? What does that look like? Well, we self-regulate. So we talked about this a little bit in the last session. We need to stay composed. We need to understand our own triggers and our own why, so we can stay calm and composed and self-regulate and model that. Because if our child's having a tantrum and then we start yelling, that is not going to help their tantrum. That's just going to escalate their behavior. So we self-regulate and we model this for our child. We notice their behavior. I love saying this. Oh, I notice you're frustrated. I notice that you were being destructive with that toy. I notice you were breaking that. That is scary. Noticing the behavior removes the judgment. So we want to simply notice it and then ask questions. Tell me why. Why were you doing that? Were you curious about that? Why do we ask kids questions when they're in that emotional state of frustration? Because if we ask them a question, it takes them out of the emotional state, because to answer a question, we have to think. We have to use the prefrontal lobes of our brain. No different than with an adult. If an adult feels judged, if you walk into work late, so I love giving adults examples they can relate to, because again, we often expect more from our kids than we expect of ourselves. But if you're late to an event or to work and you walk into your job and your boss looks at you and is like, "Why are you late? What's going on?" Your defenses go up. You're less likely to be truthful and honest, and you immediately start to defend or blame, or you just freeze. no different than with a child. If they approached you when you walked into work late and said, hey, I noticed you were late today. How is everything okay? They approached it from a non-judgment perspective, and now they've given you an opportunity to explain. And maybe you have a good reason, maybe you don't, but you're more inclined to be truthful in that type of setting. So again, the tools and things I'm telling you right now will help you in every relationship and aspect of your life. So we notice the behavior and we ask questions. And I love the iceberg theory. So if you can think of behavior, and as you're starting down this journey and you're trying on some of these things, when your child's misbehaving, if you can visualize an iceberg, the behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the part above the water. What we want to really focus on is not that. Because when we focus on the behavior, we're like, well, that's awful, that's mean, that's hurtful. We're judging. We're just judging the behavior. When we ask ourselves a question, we are also having to think and problem solve. Hey, I wonder what's going on with my child. Maybe you pick your child up from school and they're in a bad mood. Sometimes parents take that personal. I know I have. And so they get in the car and you're like, well, I didn't do any. And they're grumpy and they're snappy and they're short, especially if you have teenagers and they're rolling their eyes at you. And you're like, well, I didn't do anything to deserve this treatment, because we're taking it personal. What would it look like if instead of taking it personal and just seeing that the tip of the iceberg, if I looked at my child and I'm like, wow, I noticed you're really frustrated and you seem agitated. What's going on? How was your day? And we dive in and ask a question. Again, we're disarming them. We're giving them space. We're giving them empathy, and we're giving them understanding, and we're connecting. We're not focused on compliance and them being rude. We're truly working to connect with them, to support them so they can have changed behavior. And maybe we can support them with a healthy coping skill. So I want you to think of behavior as an iceberg. And feelings should be indicators, not dictators. I love that quote. I was listening to someone else present and they said that, and I absolutely love that. Feelings should be indicators, not dictators. Feelings are real, feelings are valid, but they should just be an indicator of a bigger problem, and we want to dive into that. We must remember all behavior is a form of communication. So whether it's poor behavior or good behavior, we don't just want to praise the good behavior. We want to recognize the difficult behavior and coach our kids and find out what skill they're missing. But we must remember. So I have an image here of a child pushing another child. I could immediately judge that behavior. Oh, that kid's so mean. Because oftentimes what we witness is the final behavior, the final punch, or the final push, or the final, somebody's breaking someone else's toy, or big Lego structure or magnetile structure. And we see the last thing, but we don't know what happened before. And there's typically a before. Kids aren't trying to be mean. They're not trying to be hurtful. They just lack skills. So in this situation, maybe the other child took the ball and they were mad. They're both missing skills. One took the ball and then one pushed. Maybe in this situation, one hit the other one. Maybe they said something hurtful. There's typically a before. Whenever my kids come home and share a scenario with me, I'm like, what happened before? I don't just hear what they're telling me. I want to know the full story. I want to understand the full picture. And again, that's that questions. I'm gathering information. I'm gaining more insight so I can truly coach them. And I'm not just hearing that last piece. I want the full picture. So composure and mindset. So now we understand that there's different parts of our brains, and we want to get kids from the emotional state to the thinking state, or from fight or flight back up to the thinking state and cognitive processing centers. But how do we do that? We stay composed. Our mindset and composure matters. We need to live life consciously. Again, that's how Conscious Not Crazy came to be. I felt crazy. I did not feel as though I was living life consciously. And my first step, and this is probably the step I recommend for most parents just to start here. The first step into composure and mindset the first step is maintaining your composure, is to identify your triggers. So you just pause. So you have to recognize what's triggering you. Is it disrespect? Is it that I'm being judged as a parent? Because oftentimes, And the second step is the pause. So you can respond with intention. So the first step is to identify your trigger, and the second step is just to pause. And that is that pause. I remember when my kids were little and I felt triggered, I was like, I'm feeling triggered. I need to step away. So then I'd pause, and sometimes I go hide in my laundry room and do laundry. So whatever it takes. Sometimes doing nothing's better than saying or doing the wrong thing, so we're not having shame and guilt and feeling bad later. So the second step is to pause so you can respond with intention. So we can break our CD-ROM and our triggered response and respond differently in hopes to help our child, to support our child, and motivate them for change behavior and teach the missing skill. And remember, I love this, no one can make you angry. We often say, or have you ever said, I know I've said it at some point in my life, you're making me so frustrated. We often put that responsibility on our kids. You're just pushing my buttons. Well, truthfully, parents, I hate to tell you, but you're choosing that. You're allowing that to happen. That's not on your kids. Yes, they might be pushing your buttons, but that's because you're allowing them to trigger you. That's because you're not pausing and you're reacting. So we might feel triggered. We might feel as though they're pushing our buttons, but no one can make us angry. Just like we can't make any person do anything. We can't make the child go to the potty before bed. We can't make them eat their peas. We can't make them do anything. We have to want them to be motivated to make that choice. And so that's what I want to be helpful with. So we want to own our behavior, and I love this, so don't give your power away. What happens is when we say they're making us angry or they're pushing our buttons, we're choosing to give them our power. And if we can, and that was very helpful to me with this recognizing my triggers and pausing and then thinking, don't give my power away. And this applies to anybody. If anyone's being confrontational with you, if you feel pressure from the outside and you choose to react and match that energy, then you're giving it power. So you want to not give your power away. And if I'm able to visualize that, I might be triggered, then I pause, and then I think to myself, don't give my power away. You don't want to give your power away to that little person. Instead, you want to coach and be a support to them. Healed people heal people, hurt people. And I love that quote because it is so true. We really have to heal ourselves, understand our triggers so we can best support our children along their journey. And if somebody's hurting us, it's typically because they are hurting. When my kids come home from school and they say, Johnny said this to me or was being hurtful, or Susie said this to me and they were being hurtful, I'm like, how do you think they were feeling about themselves? That's the first question I ask. They're not doing it to you. It has nothing to do with you. They probably don't feel good about themselves. Or maybe they're experiencing something hard in life. So we want to teach our kids empathy too for others. And we want to teach them that they are not responsible for the other person's behavior. No one can make you angry. You have a choice on how you respond to it. Now let's talk about attention. Productive attention. What we focus on, we get more of. So we want to focus on what you want. So productive attention is so important. What are you focused on? Are you focused on all of your kids' misbehavior? Are you focused on all their mistakes? Are you focused on everything that's going wrong? Or are you focused on what you need them to do? If we focus on the things going wrong, what do you think we're going to get more of? We're going to get more of the things going wrong. If we focus on what we need them to do, then they're going to be more inclined to do that. And I'll give you an example. If I say, no, stop, or don't, and then whatever it is I put after it, the child doesn't hear the no, stop, or don't. They just hear. So here's an example. You're at the pool and a child's running. The lifeguard doesn't say, stop running. They say, walk. We want to focus on what we want the child to do. If I say, don't think of an elephant, and you literally can't make your mind stop thinking of an elephant. So no, stop, or don't do not work. Instead, if a child's reaching for something fragile, or you feel like they're getting ready to touch an outlet or something dangerous, we want to tell them what we want to do, or they're holding something that's fragile, what I would say is, oh, show me that. I'm so curious, what do you have? Because if you say no, stop, or don't, and the child's holding something dangerous, let's say they're holding a knife, and they take off running because we say no, stop, or don't, because they feel like they're doing something wrong, they're more likely to get hurt. If we say, oh, what do you have? They're going to bring it to you. And then there's not going to be a power struggle. And then you can notice, I notice this is sharp. That's not safe. Can we set this safely over here? We want to focus on what we want to do so to keep them safe. And so we don't create a power struggle. So remember that. Focus on what you want, not what you don't. Did you know that your belief system dictates the information you perceive or see? We encounter 2 million images daily, yet we can only absorb 134. So whatever you believe, whatever you're focused on is what you're going to be fed more of. And a great way to kind of check in on this for your kids, if you have teenagers that are old enough with social media, hopefully they don't have social media yet. That is not a fun place to manage. And if you need support on that, the book, The Anxious Generation's amazing book that could be a whole session all on its own. But we encounter 2 million images, but we can only absorb 134. So we want to be very intentional. And a social media feed, if you're looking at your teenagers or your own, will tell you a lot about what you're focused on. I am very intentional because I do have to get on social media for work and for what I do. But I make sure I only follow positive, motivating things, maybe Christian things. I'm very intentional because I don't want it filled with a bunch of yucky, negative stuff, because I don't want that in my life. I gave up TV for a period of time for that exact reason, because I just felt it was filling me up with things that weren't adding value to my life. So we want to model that for our kids, being intentional. I talk to my kids about that. But if you're curious about where they are and you do have kids that are on devices, a great way to check in to see where they are at is by looking at their social media and seeing what they're looking at and what's being fed to them, because that'll give you some indicator as to what they're focused on. This is also true. Another example of this, if you go buy a new car, you haven't seen that car on the road, haven't noticed it, but you go buy a new car and now you see it everywhere. It's called your reticular activating system, and it's a real thing. And once you have the new car, now you're focused on that car and you see it everywhere. So whatever you tell your brain to focus on is what it will see. So if your child is constantly forgetful and forgetting things and we're constantly focused on that, do you think that's going to motivate change behavior, or is that going to start to create some sort of identity for that child where they become, I'm just forgetful, or maybe they struggle with reading. I'm just not a good reader. We start to create these identities or limiting beliefs for our kids unknowingly. We're not doing it on purpose. I have one child that's very outspoken. I have one child that's much more introverted. And I have to be careful with that because I know where one's at all the time. And I don't always know where my other child is. So I want to be careful because he's a lot of energy. I want to be careful that I'm not constantly focused on all the things that maybe aren't serving him. So we want to be very mindful with what and who we give our attention to. So and to that point, what are your limiting beliefs? Because I love this. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. My kids sometimes will be in a bad mood, or practice won't go well if your kids play sports, and they'll be like, we're just going to lose. And I tell my kids, if you tell yourself that, you probably will. Not that they're the only player on the team, but if you go in with that mindset, you're not serving yourself. What you tell yourself and what you believe matters. So if you have a limiting belief about a child that they're not good at something or they're just not athletic, be very careful on what you say with that child or to that child, because we don't want to create those limiting beliefs for them. So just be conscious, just think about that. And then one of the key differences in what I talk about versus traditional discipline is there's traditional discipline or behavior management models. There's discipline and there's punishment. To discipline, you have to be a disciple. There's connection, self-worth, and honor. And there's change behavior. There's motivation to change behavior. With punishment, traditional punishment, there's no choice, there's no learning, there's no power, there's no honor, there's no respect, and there's no connection. So we do want to discipline our kids. We do want consequences. We do want to hold them accountable. There needs to be more of that. What often happens is we make empty threats. We get caught up in the moment, there's a poor behavior, and we start taking everything away from them, but not following through with any of it. Instead, we want to slow down, we want to pause, we want to have self-awareness, we want to be conscious, we want to see the moment for what it is, we want to ask them questions, and we want to coach them through that. So we want discipline, not punishment. And with discipline, there are consequences. And we want to teach our kids they are not powerless, they are not victims, and they do have a choice.
I want to thank Kori for another great session, especially when we think about and consider the renewal of our mind that Ephesians talks about, this growing up and becoming maturity in the love of Christ. I hope you took away a lot. I took away a lot. I made notes. And if you'd like to know further information with Kori, tell us your website and podcast.
So it's cncbykori.com, and then the podcast is Conscious Not Crazy by Kori, and it's on all the platforms.
And we look forward. Hope you'll join us for next week's session. Have a great week, and God bless.